Excellent. Hi, everybody. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Drew Wham. I'm lead data scientist at Penn State's Data Empowered Learning Team. And I'm joined by Ben Hellar. He just ran to welcome his kid home from school, but he'll join us again in just a moment. We are part of the Data Empowered Learning Team, and we're going to talk today about sort of the pairing of the data science, which is a skill set that I have with human-centered design, which is Ben's skill set, and how that that union creates the projects that our team builds, and that effort really we describe as sort of a data science-based learning analytics. So starting from there, I think we would want to start with a description of kind of how our team sort of sees ourselves in relation to the rest of the university. So Penn State has a sort of a long history and good internal support for analysis that's sort of designed to go upwards. And so you can think of this as like program level analysis, reporting that goes to the president or the provost, analytic groups that support accreditation processes and federal reporting. And so that's well supported, but I think we sort of have a history of under supporting the downward facing needs. And I mean, downward, I mean to sort of a more distributed set of decision makers around our campus, sort of faculty, advisors, and the students themselves. And so they have separate, very separate analytic needs. They make lots of small scale distributed decisions rather than sort of individual policy level decisions. And their needs really sort of are to have information that flow to them at a much faster cadence than the single point decision needs of the upward facing analytics. So our group we kind of define as a data science based learning analytics. There's designed that to support that downward need. So the way we work is we have the operational workflow. It begins with the data that Penn State collects for the purposes of running the sort of business needs of the university. So these are data sets that are created through the process of enrollment, application, through grades being awarded. All of that information rests in operational systems. And what our team does, so we do not sort of play any role in that that creation of that data or the maintenance of that data. Rather, we're recipients of that data. That data flows through us, and we generate pipelines for code that transform that data and then distribute it back into enterprise systems. So we often say that we maintain code rather than data within our team. The idea is that many of you also would have core operational data sets. We both have the data that exists on our campus as well as the data that is in the UDP. And starting with that information, then what we want to do is enrich that information for a purpose that supports the student success or teaching and learning. And so we'll generally be enhancing that data in some way and then redelivering it back to the enterprise applications like Canvas or Starfish for advisors, so that we can go beyond just the affordances that come with Canvas and Starfish from the vendor. So this kind of begins our journey in that we're gonna take that data out of those operational stores, and we move them to the Data Empowered Learning Team's cloud site. That provides us a unified place in which we can work. We can build things that have dependencies on our copy of the data, don't require going all the way back to the original source when we build applications. And so when I first began, before we started building on top of Unizin's UDP, the world looked a lot like this. So we had lots of different educational resources where educational data, different types of educational data accumulated. And we would take copies of that information from those sources, we would put them into the Data Empowered Learning Team cloud, and we were responsible for doing all of the crosswalk transformations that allowed each of those sources to communicate with one another. That picture looks a little bit different now, and that now that we've sort of adopted the UDP and are using some of the unified sources, particularly the unified sources around activity data that are happening in the online environment. We're able to utilize that as a kind of a sole source, but we still have a number of different local data stores that we rely on. So we still have a portion of unification to do within our team. So within our cloud, we sort of unify that data so that it can sort of be compatible with one another. And then on top of that, we build transformations that go out to support our applications. So I think you can go to the next one. So we create these analytic views that are combinations of all those sources that are designed to support individual applications that we build. There's really two outbound products that our team supports. The first is kind of the easiest one, and those are direct data integrations. So if we build a new metric, perhaps an alert that indicates that a student hasn't logged in the last 7 days into any of the systems, that can go perhaps directly as a file back into Canvas or Starfish and inform an alert that happens in that application. As an example, we support an alert that happens in Starfish for that exact purpose. So this is a view from inside of our advising application, Starfish, and along with all of the other data that Starfish shows advisors, our team is responsible for these bottom 3 rows that inform, in this case, that the student has low activity in one of their courses and 0 activity in 2 of their courses. We'll talk more about how these are generated in a bit, but this is sort of the lowest hanging fruit and the simplest example of something that our team might do, and is a direct data integration into an enterprise system. Now, we're generally not fortunate enough that everything that we want to do can be simply solved by adding another row of information into an enterprise system. So we also take on, and Ben's role is to support when we need sort of a more holistic addition to an enterprise system, and we call that an embedded analytic. So in this case, we will generate an API that is going to support the retrieval in a secure way to power that analytic, and then Ben will generate an application that can then be embedded into one of the enterprise applications. So this is one of the core deliverables that our team is designed to make. And the important part about that is that we want to enable our enterprise applications to have access to any data source that would be useful for fulfilling sort of the job that the people that are using that application would need, and not necessarily be limited to only the scope of the application. So Starfish, for example, natively only has access to the data that originally was integrated into it. It wouldn't have easy access to Canvas. That doesn't have to be the case. We want to provide the ability to give Canvas information in Starfish, and as you'll see, Starfish information in Canvas. So that's the overall idea of what we're trying to do. I think now Ben is going to start showing some of that in action.
Thank you, Drew. Thank you for that good segue. So I'm about to show 2 different tools. So Course Insights is our application, our learning analytics applications designed for instructors, and Elevate is designed for academic advisors. And so Course Insights is a perfect example of how we've designed an application to be embedded in one of our enterprise tools. So this tool specifically is designed as an LTI application. If you're not familiar with LTI, that means Learning Technology Integration. And in practice, what that means is when you look at when you're in a Canvas course, which is what this is an example of what a Canvas course looks like. In the navigation, there is a module that you can add to a course, and this module is a link to our application. So this application for faculty that are a part of our pilot of Course Insights, they have this link available from their course, and they can click it and get and connect to additional analytics that we're able to provide them, that Drew is able to provide from collecting data from our SIS systems, a Starfish, from Canvas, et cetera. and be able to collate that and provide it to answer questions that are important to faculty at different points of the year. And so we've designed these tabs across the top, and I'm going to show you examples of some of these to answer questions that faculty have at different times of the year. So at the beginning of the year, it's very important for faculty to understand what is the population of students enrolled in my class, and what does that look like. And so we show graphs like we have here, like the semester standing, which is an approximation of how much of how many semesters a student has been a part of the Penn State system by looking at the total credits and calculating it. So we have these numbers that represent, again, how many semesters a student has earned credit-wise. And so for a course that is a large lecture course, you may have a lot of first and second semester students with a trailing amount of other students coming into the course. We can also show other demographic information like degree programs and plans. So if I'm teaching a course, I can see where what programs and what majors and minors and degrees are students coming into my course with. And so this shows that in this, again, this large enrollment example, there's a lot of students here from the College of Liberal Arts, as well as the Donald P. Belisario College of Communications. And yes, we are mandated to say that full name now, as well as College of Helen Youth and Development, et cetera, et cetera. And so this is, again, useful as an instructor at the beginning of the year to understand, okay, who is going to be in my course? What sort of examples can I cater? How can I adapt my pedagogical structures and the way that I'm going to present my material to make sure that all students are going to be able to, understand where I'm coming from. And along those lines, the other tab that we have, one of the other tabs is called Learning Pathways. And this is interesting because this shows prior and current enrollments. So what we do is we take the transcripts for all the students that are enrolled in your section, and we simply look at what were all the courses that students took in the prior semester. And so this is very helpful for instructors, not just to see whether students had completed some prerequisites, but also what were the other courses that they had taken. A lot of times there's unofficial prerequisites for a course, and that it's Math 140 may not be required, but man, does that calculus course really, I've noticed that students who have had that course do better in my course now. So it's important for me to be able to identify which courses are really where are the students coming from in that prior semester. And so we have that tab and charts like this to help instructors really familiarize themselves with what's going on. Now, in the process of during the semester, of when a semester is actually live, this information is not as useful as showing instructors what activity is happening in my class right now. And so we take the online activity that's being recorded in Canvas and Top Hat, and that has been, as Drew pointed out, has been wonderfully aggregated and normalized in the UDP, and we're able to then visualize that so instructors can ask and see answers to questions like what how much activity are my students doing in Canvas versus Top Hat. And this is data that we've had and added in now, and we're also excited that in the fall we're looking to add in Kaltura data, so we can also answer questions like how much time and how much activity is being spent on my students rewatching my course lectures that I've uploaded to the Kaltura Media Gallery. How much activity is being spent on that. And to be then answer further questions that then stem from that. And all of this data that we collect, all this activity data, we aggregate together to be able to provide this next view, which is our online activity view. So when we show the instructor first the roster of students in their course, and then when they click on a student, we can show them some key information that we've gathered from various sources, but B, we take their activity and we aggregate it into what we have here is the rolling 7-day activity chart. Now I'm going to bring Drew back in here to talk about the activity chart and sort of how we're able to leverage data science and what this activity chart means and how it can be interpreted. Go ahead, Drew.
Great, thanks. Will you actually go back 2 slides to the raw data? So one of the things that distinguishes our team is that we sort of endeavor to not just show sort of the facts of when a student has interacted with the online material and how much, but we work with faculty and advisors to better understand, well, what kind of questions would you want to be able to answer easily with this information? And so sort of recognizing that this view has the same information as I think, Ben, you can go to that next view now, the same information as this view. Is sort of an important transition because what we had before was the facts of when and how much, but this is designed to help answer the question of is there a behavior being represented by this information that might require intervention or outreach on the part of an advisor or faculty. So that's the goal of this graphic. We'll talk through sort of what each of the parts are. So first, there's the blue line. The blue line represents the average activity at a given time for the student in the class. So this is a representation of a student that doesn't actually exist, but sort of is the average action that hopefully, if most students are doing the right thing at a given time, this also is a proxy for what maybe you should be doing. And then the red line represents the individual student that you might have dug into following the UI design. So that, to the degree that those two patterns are different from one another, you can uncover sort of patterns that the student is sort of diverging from what everybody's doing. So that may be a positive or a negative situation. So what we want to find is we want to enable faculty. One of the things that they've asked for, particularly early on in the pandemic, is we really need to find the students that are sort of systematically disengaging with coursework so we can reach out to them. And so what we see in the background are the two different colors. In yellow, we see a warning. That's present whenever a student is participating at less than half of the rate that other students in the classroom are. And then in orange, we see a full alert, and then alert means that the student hasn't interacted at all in the last 7 days. But the important caveat for both of those metrics is that we don't provide either metric when the average student is not engaging above a certain amount. And that is an important element as well, because that allows us to be robust about sort of the way that people use Canvas. So if a course doesn't use Canvas at all, we don't issue alerts because the average student is not engaged, and that's totally expected. And then also when our students go on Thanksgiving holiday or spring break, our system doesn't issue alerts because the average student is also disengaging.
March 7th through the 14th on this graph is is evidence of that exact pattern. So this was spring break at Penn State, March 7th through, roughly right around there.
All right, Ben, I'll turn it back over to you to talk about our next application.
Yeah, thank you, Drew. So, so our other application that we have available is that we made available is Elevate. Elevate is taking this same idea of providing a window into a student's online activity and providing that data to academic advisors, to advisors that are looking not just at one class, but over an entire semesters. And so what we do is we connect to that advisor Starfish roster. And so then we marry sort of that Starfish data with the activity data to say, okay, across that student's schedule, how many of those courses that they are enrolled in, how many of them happen to have low activity or zero activity? And we can provide counts across an entire roster. So out of a roster of, your average advising load at average advisor at Penn State has somewhere between 200 to 300 students on the roster at any given time. And so this provides a view to be able to filter and then down select to figure, okay, who are the students that need my attention? And who are the students that I should take a look at? So an example of then clicking into a student on the page would be this view here. This shows what I was talking about before. This represents the student's entire course schedule. And now we're not just seeing the activity in one course, but the activity that's occurring in each course. And so in particular, this has then been designed to draw the advisor's attention to what is important. And so in this case, this student has had low activity in this agricultural business management course. And because it's below that 50% average, we put a low activity alert. And then because this Earth 101 class, this student has had zero activity in the past 7 days, we have the orange zero activity alert that we put here. In fact, it's not only been 7 days, we can see over here that the activity is actually 25 days. So and this is then sort of gets to one of our next points that I want to talk about, is that one of the important aspects of providing this data to instructors and to advisors is that we provide them training in how to interpret and understand the data. And one of the biggest lessons that we teach in those training sessions is that activity doesn't always correlate to performance, and that when you are making a decision, you should be data informed and not data driven, meaning that like you should consider all the other factors and knowledge that you know about this specific student to drive whether or not that this is a student that needs your attention. Maybe you know that this student, and so that in that context really matters, because maybe you didn't know this student was disengaged from Earth 101, and this is actually something that is important because it's prerequisite for later on. That would more likely prompt an engagement from an advisor, or maybe the advisor knows that this is a student that was planning on taking leave and happened to and told their advisor that they were working ahead of and working with the instructor to work ahead of the course, so that this zero activity alert is not unexpected. And so the context of of what the user is needs to be taken care in consideration when viewing the data from this page. And that is why we provide not just the schedule information, but we also provide more information that we're pulling from Starfish and our SIS systems to show more about where this student is in their undergraduate career, where this is, who their advisors are. I mean, they have Luke Skywalker as their advisor. That's pretty awesome to me. So, those are all things that we can better, help frame, to better understand where the student is situated at. And this not just comes from like the UX perspective, but also from the data science perspective as well. So I'm going to bring Drew back in here, and just to kind of point at like how we actually build the page from the data side. Go ahead, Drew.
Sure. So as we were sort of talking about earlier about sort of bringing together data inside of the inside of the Dell Team Cloud. Once we've done that, we unify those data sets into individual tables that support each page. And so each of the pages that Ben has shown so far, there's an API that is designed on top of you might call it a table or a view designed to support that page. But those tables are blended components from different sources. And so this page here, from annotated, the top area is coming from Starfish, as well as Lion Path, which is our SIS system. And the bottom area is coming from things like UDP data marts or raw UDP resources like the activity data itself that we've enhanced to give metrics from the raw counts, or line path on the left. So the final tool is an amalgamation of data from all over the campus.
Yep. And one of the other things I wanted to add in here is that from the UX side, what makes that so impactful for me is that if we were to have built this system differently and had to connect each of these systems individually, that may take forever for the page to load. Because Drew has optimized this API, this view to provide this data, we can literally go from any student at the university to another in a second. But, all of this page and all of this activity data can be loaded at near instantaneous speeds. And that provides a great user experience for an advisor that doesn't have a lot of time in between meetings. And we've been told from advisors who say, listen, it can take me 2 minutes to pull up a student's transcript. And it's sometimes easier for me just to go to your site and to be able to, if I have 2 minutes just before a student walks in, to get a sense of where they're at. And that's one of the easiest ways I use the tool. And so being able to jump from a student specific graph to then another course, all of this loads, fairly, seamlessly and effortlessly when we're looking at that data. There was a question I just saw both about when does the data refresh and what is the latency. And I just wanted to address that, the data that we have in the tools that we update it nightly. So as current as the UDP is as of midnight the night before is as current as we are. So we pull from the UDP, we pull from our SIS system, Lion Path and Starfish every night and do that synthesis nightly so that there is always a fresh data set every day. All right, so I've shown you a little bit about both Elevate and Course Insights, and here's just a little bit of a wrap up before I talk about some of the HCD and UX stuff. Is that really these tools have been really positively received from our community. When we started our pilot 2 years ago with Elevate, we were working with just a small number. We have since made this publicly available to any advisor at Penn State who has a Starfish roster. And we have about 400 unique, in the past semester, we had about 400 unique advisors that was representative usage across 22 of the Commonwealth campuses at Penn State. And that represents about 43% of all students at Penn State are currently advised by someone using Elevate, with the other 50% mainly being the faculty advisors that do a lot of advising that we're trying to make inroads in order to get their adoption. But most of the full-time academic advisors are using our tool, and that's been a great success for us. Course Insights is a newer pilot. We just started it in the fall, and while we're at 100, it was interesting that we started with an initial pilot of 14. We had really no intention of growing it. We just wanted to test it out. But because of word of mouth from those 14 people, it has grown to 100 faculty. And we've been constantly adding more throughout the fall and the spring semester. And we're looking to, just like what we do with Elevate, we bring people in as a pilot in order to get their feedback incorporated, understand the different issues that come with presenting data, and are slowly growing, that we're gonna be slowly growing that tool over time. Which leads well into the next part of this talk, which is how does the human-centered design philosophy blend in with the data science? And so I'm not going to read this entire page, but I just want to highlight some of the keywords here that, like, what we're doing is we're trying to empower decision makers through an agile design process, and that's really incorporating all these broader ideas that I want to touch on in a minute. And so the first thing that I want to say is, like, so when we talk about human-centered design, who are the humans? The humans here in this case are, we consider a sort of a 3-layer model when we look at how we support our end users. And these users are basically the people who are working on the front lines of student success, those who have the direct impact. Remember Drew's diagram at the beginning, we're developing analytics that point downwards to people that are at the front lines. They are the faculty, the staff, the academic advisors, the retention specialists, the student affairs people that are working and have a need for this type of data in order to help students. And so when we bring people in and we train them on how to use Elevate and how to use Course Insights, we ask them to participate later on in pilot in focus groups. And then we take that data and we learn from it and say, okay, and when we meet with them, we ask them very simple questions like, is this data being helpful? Or is there other data that we could provide you that would help you do your job? And sometimes what they come back with is things that are low hanging fruit, things that we can then implement in a week. Other times we have to vet those requests. And when we vet those requests, we do that through what we call a champions group. And so what we do is we find the power users of our systems, as well as the senior advisors that really are excellent advisors and care about their students. And we meet with a small group of them. And after we've collected all of this feedback, we take it to them and say, and say, okay, well, which of these are most important? And we use them to help sort of prioritize what would be the most impactful features to their community. And we do this for both faculty in Course Insights and advisors in Elevate. And then after we get that sort of list of priorities, we then take that back to our stakeholders, and we sort of then do another level of vetting to say, okay, well, can we give this type of data to them? Does this comply with Penn State's institutional values? Does this comply with policies on ethics? And what sort of training do we need to then provide for people to be able to interpret this new data that we want to provide? And that is our 3-layer system that we use to advocate for design. But and I think the best way to show this is to show this agile process that we do. And I'm going to just walk you through a quick example here. Although before I do, I realize there's another point that I wanted to make here, and that is that Unizin provides all of this great data to us, but it needs teams like what Drew and I do to be able to provide that last mile integration to really optimize the insights we can get. It's not just good enough to provide data to the people. You also have to be able to help them be able to interpret it and understand the larger situation in which they work. So as an example of just how this UX process works, I'm going to show you, remember from Elevate, at the top of the page, we show some basic profile data about who a student is. And when we started Elevate in fall of 2020, this was our first step. We just say, okay, let's take some information, let's take some attributes that we found in the data, and we put them up on the screen, and we'll see if that's helpful. And then the first thing we did is we started talking to users that, said that first layer of the onion. We went to those end users, the advisors. We ran focus groups, and they said, well, that's good, but we also need campus. We also need the program, the major. We need more information. So we started to put that information in here. And that was like the second iteration that changed the UI. Then we started to take that same UI and we took it then to our champions group. And they said, well, it's great that you have total credits in here, but in order to understand total credits, we also need the amount of credits a student has earned at Penn State, because that then determines, how much, have they transferred AP credits or from another institution. And it's not just the amount of credits, but also when were they admitted. All of that is helpful and impactful information for an advisor to make the decision. And those are the types of information that you may not even get from a focus group, even with dozens of advisors, but sometimes a champions group will say, well, no, in order to make this sort of inference, we need this type of data. And so let's bring that into the fold. And then this final iteration, one of the most recent iterations, is an example of when requirements come from stakeholders like the organization. So the detail that was iterated in this version was both organizing it by career, but here, importantly, we've added students' gender identity, I'd say we're in the process of adding the gender identity labels, as this has been a new initiative, a new DEI initiative across Penn State, that students should be allowed to select their own identity labels and have that then permeated through all of the enterprise applications, and as well as their preferred name. And so we've made changes and adoptions in order to reflect this new change in institutional values and making sure that we are consistent with what is expected from the larger Penn State application ecosystem. And then lastly here, when talking about the broader perspectives of human-centered design, well, it can be very easy to confuse it with just UI. We need to consider the complete experience in relation to those values and not just the UI. And so these are the other elements that I've talked on, but they really, this is both what makes my job insanely challenging, but also fun, because there's a lot of nuance in trying to figure out, especially where we are in our team of, a lot of times we are, learning analytics is very new, and sometimes can be very challenging for people to understand what it can bring to bear. And so being able to understand, okay, what is the data that people need, but how else can we provide training for those needs? What do people need to be able to understand that data? And so we've provided focus groups, we've done and training sessions, and we've also worked on asynchronous material so that and even things as low level as tooltips, that people can understand what these fields mean and how they can help understand it. Another layers to, other more layers to this onion, going back into that cooking metaphor, is the privacy and ethics issue. Learning analytics can be a challenge for data governance. It's not always well defined, and what type of data an advisor can see versus what an instructor can see versus what a faculty advisor can see. All of these things are issues that need sort of broader that need broader consideration, and having to think about what should those values be. And we work with our privacy office at Penn State, and we have Penn State has a privacy impact assessment where we work with we fill out a form to help to declare that this is the type of new data that we're trying to unveil, and they sort of help us evaluate the privacy and ethical nature of what we're trying to do. And so we have a really good relationship with that office as we are constantly trying to bring new data to bear to make it available to advisors and instructors. As I said, this is just the host of the larger perspective that we have. And that's what we consider like the larger human-centered design process. So to wrap it up, I'm going to bring Drew back to talk about the sort of final key points here. Drew?
Great, thanks. So I'm going to wrap up with just some of the core philosophies of our group. And the first one is that what we're trying to do is break down some of the barriers that exist between enterprise systems These are importantly designed systems to support different working communities like advisors and instructors, but we want to be able to create a cohesive view of information from both of those and not let the information that's available to those separate groups be dictated by just the barriers of the technology. We should enable cross-system insight when that insight is sort of consistent with the needs of those individuals' roles. And so by doing what we're doing, we sort of knock that barrier down, but at the same time, we want to provide that information in a way that the users don't even know that they're necessarily not in the native tool. So speaking with our faculty, when they are using our tool, they largely are unaware unless we've told them that they're anywhere but native Canvas. And so, and we view that as a win because it means that they're not having to go and feel like they're learning a new resource. They're just going about their normal in-class activity. Finally, I think it's really important that we also are designing these in concert and collaboration with those user communities. And so instead of attempting to just provide a bunch of facts to those user communities and asking them to figure out how to connect the facts to action, we collaborate with them to understand how they want to do that and then attempt to deliver something that's not just facts, but actually helps them create knowledge so that it's really impactful in their daily use. And I think the adoption of our tools on our campus really sort of evidence that that's been successful. Thank you all for joining us. I really appreciate some of the questions that have already been in chat, and very thankful to receive questions now.
Yes, thank you for allowing us to present. And if there's any questions, there's an email here, delteam@psu.edu, that'll get to both Drew and myself as well as the rest of our team.
Nice work, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.